In 1989, a female state trooper vanished during a routine traffic stop in the middle of nowhere. No struggle. No blood. No car. Just gone. For 11 years, no one could explain it, until a fire broke out deep in the woods, revealing a burned patrol tent. Inside, a melted badge, human bones, and a notebook hidden under the floor. The truth that followed shocked the entire town, and exposed two officers who thought they got away with murder. But what really happened that night? Why was she watching her own co-workers? And how did her final message survive the fire? This story is about lies, betrayal, and a sister who refused to stop digging. And once you hear what they found inside that shed, you'll never forget Trooper Lacy Monroe. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? It was October 18, 1989. Trooper Lacy Monroe was 25 years old. She had been with the Highway Patrol for 3 years. People in her town respected her. She was smart, calm, and didn't scare easily. That evening around 7:45 p.m., she left the station like always. It was a quiet Tuesday night. Her patrol route took her through the edges of a national forest, a place with long roads, thick trees, and almost no houses nearby. She drove a standard police cruiser, full tank, working radio, loaded gear in the trunk. A few people remembered seeing her that night. One man said she stopped by a gas station to get coffee. Another driver passed her on a lonely stretch of road. Nothing seemed unusual. Lacy had done this route many times before. But this time was different. Something was waiting in those woods. Something she didn't see coming. At 8:50 p.m. she made a radio call. It was the last time anyone ever heard her voice. What happened after that call would turn into one of the strangest missing persons cases the state had ever seen. Because after that night, Lacy was just gone. The 8:50 p.m. call came in fast. Lacy's voice was steady but low. She said, "Dispatch, I'm pulling over near mile marker 77. There's something strange just off the road. I'm going to check it out." She didn't say what she saw. She didn't sound scared. But she also didn't give any details. The dispatcher asked her to repeat. Lacy didn't respond. They called her again. No answer. That wasn't normal. Lacy always followed procedure. If she stepped out of her vehicle, she would call it in. She would never go silent like that. The dispatcher kept trying. For over 10 minutes, nothing. A second unit was finally sent to check on her, but the area was remote. It took 45 minutes to reach the scene. When they got there, Lacy wasn't. Her cruiser was gone. There were no flashing lights. No open doors. No broken glass. But just past the shoulder of the road, something caught their eye: fresh tire marks. They led into the forest. The tracks weren't easy to follow. They bent through trees and disappeared into thick brush. It was too dark to go far without help. The officers marked the scene, called for backup, and started what would become an 11-year mystery. Everyone expected to find a body. But what they found or didn't find was even worse. By 10:30 p.m., more officers had arrived. They brought dogs, spotlights, and search gear. They followed the tire marks as far as they could. But after about 300 feet, the tracks stopped. No cruiser. No body. No sounds. The search team spread out. They checked ditches, trees, and nearby trails. Still nothing. The area was too wide, too dark, too quiet. There were no footprints. No torn clothing. No signs of a struggle. Even the air felt strange. It was like Lacy had been erased. They searched all night. At sunrise, helicopters were brought in. Boats searched nearby creeks. Dozens of volunteers helped. Officers knocked on cabin doors and questioned hunters. Still, no one saw anything. By the next afternoon, the official story was this. Trooper Lacy Monroe was missing in action. Her cruiser was gone. Her gear was gone. And no one could explain how. Some officers thought she'd gone rogue. Others feared something worse. The public started to whisper. Aunt Katie, Lacy's little sister, started asking questions no one wanted to answer. By the end of the second day, the search had turned desperate. Officers, dogs, and volunteers had covered miles of forest. Planes scanned from above. Nothing was found. Not even a scrap of fabric. Not a piece of her car. It didn't make sense. There were no signs of a fight. No blood, no broken branches, no drag marks. No signs of a crash. And even stranger, no radio. Lacy's unit had a police radio with GPS. But that signal had vanished completely. It was like her car had been turned off and erased. Investigators were confused. Frustrated. Some believed she had been taken. Others said maybe she got lost. But that idea didn't fit. Lacy was trained for the woods. She would have left signs behind. A trail. A flare. Something. But there was just nothing. The place where the tire tracks ended became a symbol, an invisible wall. On one side was normal life. On the other side, Lacy had disappeared. The officers tried to stay focused. They didn't want to say the word out loud, but everyone was thinking it. Dead. Still, without proof, it was just a guess. After a week, the main search team pulled out. A small unit stayed behind. They kept looking for another month. But no new clues ever turned up. No car. No body. No answers. When the search ended, the whispers began. At first, people said the obvious. Maybe Lacy was kidnapped. Maybe she came across a drug deal. Or a hunter snapped. But then the stories got darker. Some said Lacy had been working on something secret. That she knew things she wasn't supposed to. Maybe she saw something, and someone wanted to shut her up. Others believed it wasn't an outsider at all. That someone inside the police force had done something to her. And then there were the strange ones. A few people swore the forest was cursed. That people vanished there before. That there were places in those woods where radios stopped working and sounds didn't carry. One man even claimed he heard screaming the night she went missing. But he changed his story 3 times. Lacy's family didn't buy any of it. Her sister Katie believed something bad had happened, something real. And she wasn't going to stop until she found out what. But the department was quiet. They gave short answers. They said no foul play, and ongoing investigation, and we're doing all we can. But they weren't. Behind closed doors, Lacy's case was already being labeled as cold. By November, the posters had started to fade. Trooper Lacy Monroe's face was taped in shop windows, gas stations, and pinned to every bulletin board across the county. But people were already walking past them. Nobody knew what to say anymore. The search teams had stopped. The helicopters were gone. The daily press updates ended. There were still tips coming in, strange noises, someone spotting a cruiser, a shadow in the woods, but none of them led anywhere. Officers checked out every lead, but each one hit a dead end. Her name stayed in the system. But her file sat in a drawer. One officer quietly admitted it to Katie. Off the record? We're out of ideas. Katie couldn't believe it. Her sister didn't just vanish. Someone had to know something. She started printing her own flyers, calling the press, posting ads. But nothing changed. The official line from the department stayed the same. We're investigating all possibilities. But behind the scenes, the work had stopped. The case had stalled. Officers were rotated. Leads were buried under new paperwork. Lacy became a story. Then a rumor. Then a memory. Thanksgiving passed. Then Christmas. A new year came. No answers. No trace. No closure. By early 1990, the state quietly listed her case as suspended pending new evidence. That was code for cold case. Katie felt like she was the only one still looking. And in some ways, she was. After the case went cold, most people moved on. They stopped asking about Lacy. Stopped checking the news. Some officers got transferred. Some retired. It was like the story faded out. But not for Katie Monroe. Katie was Lacy's little sister. She was 22 at the time, still in college, still figuring out life. But when her sister vanished, everything changed. Katie dropped out for a while. She moved back home. And she started asking the questions no one else would. She called the station every week. She asked for case files. She asked about tips. She asked about the tire tracks in the woods. Most of the time she got the same answer, there's nothing new. But Katie didn't believe that. She didn't believe her sister just disappeared without a trace. She didn't believe the rumors that Lacy ran away. She didn't believe the idea that someone just got lucky and made her vanish. Katie remembered who Lacy was, careful, smart, and strong. Something happened, there was a reason. So she kept pushing. She went through Lacy's things. She checked her journals, her photos, her gear. She even visited the place where the tire tracks ended. Alone. And the more she searched, the more something felt wrong. Katie kept thinking back to one moment. It happened 3 weeks before Lacy vanished. They were at their parents' house just having dinner. Nothing fancy, pasta, garlic bread, soda on the table. The TV was on in the background. Lacy seemed distracted that night. She kept checking the window. She kept glancing at her watch. She wasn't talking much. Katie finally asked, "What's going on with you?" At first, Lacy brushed it off. Said it was just work stress. But Katie pressed her again. And that's when Lacy said something weird. She leaned in and whispered, "I think someone's been following me." Katie laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Lacy didn't laugh. She looked serious. Her voice was calm, but her eyes weren't. She said she noticed the same truck parked near her house 2 nights in a row. That it followed her for a few miles after work once. She couldn't prove it, but it felt off. Katie asked if it could be a random driver. Lacy said no. She said, "I think it's someone who works with me. Maybe not from my department, but someone who knows my schedule." Katie didn't know what to say. Now looking back, she wishes she had asked more. After that dinner, Katie tried to bring it up again. A few days later, she called Lacy and asked if she was okay. That's when Lacy said something else. Something that really stuck. She said, "There's something wrong at work. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm trying to figure it out." Katie asked her to explain. Lacy wouldn't go into details. She just said she had started noticing strange calls that didn't match the logs. She said certain patrol cars were being signed out at weird times, and that some officers were going off route with no reason. It sounded like nothing at first, but then Lacy said she had started writing things down, keeping track in a notebook. Not her official log, a private one. Katie asked if she had told anyone. Lacy said no. She didn't trust anyone yet. She wanted to be sure before she brought it up. She didn't sound scared, but she didn't sound safe either. Katie told her to be careful. Lacy promised she was. But that was the last real talk they had before she disappeared. And now Katie couldn't stop thinking. Was Lacy getting close to something she wasn't supposed to find? By March of 1990, Katie had enough. She walked straight into the state police headquarters with a box of copies, notes and maps, everything Lacy had mentioned. She told the front desk she wanted to speak with the Internal Affairs Unit. She wanted someone to reopen the case and look at what Lacy was investigating before she vanished. They let her wait. 4 hours. Finally, a senior officer came out and listened. He took her paperwork, flipped through a few pages, and then told her something that made her stomach drop. He said, "You need to stop chasing shadows. Your sister wasn't well." Katie froze. The officer went on to say there was no proof of anything illegal happening. That her sister had always been a bit intense. That maybe she just ran off. Or maybe she had a breakdown. These things happen. Katie pushed back. She told him about the private notebook. The weird patrol car logs. The truck that followed Lacy. But the officer shut her down. He said, "There's no record of any of that. And we're not going to drag innocent officers into rumors." He handed her back the file. Then walked away. That was the moment Katie realized something darker might be going on. Not only were they ignoring her, they were protecting something. And maybe, just maybe, they already knew what happened to Lacy. Katie went home angry. And scared. That night, she pulled out all of Lacy's things again, her patrol bag, old uniforms, notebooks, everything. Most of the official logs were clean. Nothing odd. Nothing strange. But then, inside a zipped pocket of Lacy's gym bag, Katie found a second notebook. It was smaller, wrapped in plastic, and covered in dirt like it had been hidden in a trunk or under a seat. Inside, the pages were messy, scribbled notes, names, times, and strange markings. But one name was underlined twice. James Weller. Katie had never heard of him. She looked him up. James Weller was a former sheriff's deputy. He had retired suddenly in 1987, after a fight with another officer. There were rumors about his temper. A few internal reports. But nothing ever stuck. Now he lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of town, near the same wooded area where Lacy's cruiser disappeared. Katie's heart was racing. Lacy had circled the name. Then drawn an arrow to the words. Night shift logs don't match. She flipped more pages. Weller's name came up 3 more times. Katie didn't know what Weller had done, but her sister had been watching him. And now Katie would too. Katie couldn't sleep. That name, James Weller, kept flashing in her mind. She needed to see where he lived. So one cold morning in March, she borrowed her dad's pickup and drove out toward the edge of town. Past mile marker 112. Past the old gravel road that Lacy used to patrol. There was no address listed for Weller. But public records gave a rough area. A remote patch of forest. Barely even on the map. Katie parked at the tree line and started walking. The deeper she went, the quieter it got. The woods were thick, heavy with mist. Branches snapped under her boots. Birds scattered. A crow screamed above her. Then she saw it. Through a break in the trees, a cabin. Weather-beaten. Half covered in vines. The windows were dark and there was a tarp-covered truck in the back. Katie felt a chill crawl up her spine. She didn't get any closer. She didn't knock. Didn't take photos. Something about the place felt off. Like it didn't want to be seen. Like someone inside already knew she was there. Katie turned around and walked out fast, back to the truck. heart pounding. She reported everything to the police the next day. Katie came in with everything: the cabin's location, photos of tire tracks near the trees, and Lacy's notebook with Weller's name. She handed it all to the detective handling cold cases. He barely looked at it. He told her they already spoke to Weller back in '91. Said he wasn't working when Lacy vanished. Said he had no motive. Katie pushed back. She asked if anyone had checked his property, his records, his vehicles. The detective sighed and said, "There's no cause for a search. It's a dead lead. Case still closed. No further action taken." Katie walked out shaking, furious. She had come with real evidence. A possible suspect. A trail her sister clearly followed. And still, silence. It was like trying to scream through a wall. She sat in her car and cried, not just because the case was going nowhere, but because it felt like someone didn't want it solved. Not back then. Not now. 2 years had passed since Trooper Lacy Monroe disappeared. It was now spring of 1991. The case had gone cold. Katie had stopped getting updates. Her calls weren't returned. It felt like everyone had moved on. Then, on April 19th, police scanners in the area lit up. Male found deceased, gunshot wound. Remote cabin. No sign of struggle. The cabin was James Weller's. The same ex-deputy whose name Lacy had written in her private notebook. The same man Katie tried to warn them about. Now he was dead. A hiker had been cutting through the forest when he saw smoke. The cabin's chimney was active, but no one answered the door. The hiker got closer and saw a broken window. Inside, Weller was slumped over in a chair. One gunshot to the head. A revolver on the floor. Local police quickly labeled it self-inflicted. He had no family. No suicide note. No sign of forced entry. But the door had been unlocked. And a light was still on in the back room. The scene felt strange. Katie showed up 2 days later. She begged the sheriff to re-examine Lacy's case. She wrote his name down for a reason, she said. Now he's dead. You think that's a coincidence? The sheriff didn't say much. Just nodded and said they'd take another look. But deep down, Katie knew what was coming. They didn't want a new mystery. They wanted the old one to stay buried. Police searched James Weller's cabin the next morning. At first it looked normal. Dusty floors, old dishes, some empty beer bottles. But the back room? That was different. There were boxes stacked high along one wall. Most were filled with junk. Tools. Papers. Some old police reports from when Weller was still a deputy. But one box stopped them cold. Inside were a set of state trooper handcuffs, 2 police radios, a flashlight marked L. Monroe, scratched faintly on the handle, and a folded dark green uniform patch, torn, soaked with something brown. It was blood. And stitched into the patch was part of a state trooper badge. Katie saw photos of it later. She nearly collapsed. She recognized the style. It matched the shoulder patch on Lacy's patrol shirt. Same fabric, same threads, same size. For Katie, this was it. The proof. She told reporters. That patch came from my sister's jacket. I know it. I touched it. This man had her gear in his house. But police didn't confirm that. Instead, they called the scene unclear. They sent the items to the lab. And while the community buzzed, some sure Weller was guilty, others unsure, the department stayed quiet. Too quiet. It felt like something huge was just under the surface. And no one wanted to pull it up. 6 weeks later, the lab results came back. Katie was at home when she got the call. An officer told her, "The blood on the patch is too old. It's degraded. We can't match it to anyone." Katie was stunned. She asked if they tested it against Lacy's DNA. Against her parents. Anyone in the department. The officer just repeated, "No usable sample." And that was it. No charges. No reopening of the case. No statement to the press. A man had her sister's flashlight. Her patch. Her blood. But officially, it meant nothing. Katie pushed again. She filed public record requests. She even called a private lab in Colorado, offering to send the patch herself. But the police said the sample was already discarded. Destroyed. It was too degraded to store, they said. And just like that, the last real clue was gone. To this day, Katie believes the sample could have been tested. That it was never about the science, it was about shutting the door. She said in a later interview. That patch sat in that man's cabin for almost 2 years. Then, the moment someone finally looks at it, poof. It's worthless. You tell me if that sounds right. The case was closed. Again. And this time it felt permanent. Katie didn't stop. She couldn't. That uniform patch had blood on it. That flashlight had her sister's initials. And yet, according to the department, it meant nothing. So she drove straight to the station. She waited 4 hours just to speak with the cold case detective. When he finally came out, she stood up and said, "If it was your sister, would you give up this easy?" He didn't answer that. She laid it out again, everything. Lacy's notes. The night she vanished. Weller's name. The cabin. The items. The blood. "You have to reopen this," Katie pleaded. He thumbed through the file, barely glancing at the photos. Then said, "It's not enough to go on." Katie's hands trembled. "You're telling me a dead man had state trooper gear soaked in blood, and you still won't look into it?" The detective just shook his head. "We can't build a case on assumptions. No witnesses. No forensics. No body." Katie slammed her palm on the desk. "That was her body. That patch. That's what's left of her." He looked away. Said nothing. Later she found out the case hadn't just stalled. It had been marked as inactive. They didn't believe Weller killed her. They didn't believe anyone had. They still listed Lacy as missing. Katie walked out of the station that day and sat in her car for a long time. She stared at the cold case board through the window. Her sister's photo wasn't even on it. By late 1991, Lacy Monroe's name had vanished from the headlines. No more press releases. No more nightly news segments. No more volunteers stapling missing posters to power poles. Her face faded from the walls of the precinct. Her badge number faded from conversations. Other crimes had taken over. New stories. Bigger names. A serial arsonist in the north. A string of robberies along the interstate. A missing teen from 2 towns over. People stopped asking about Lacy. Except Katie. She kept printing flyers. Leaving voicemails. Visiting old officers who once worked with her sister. Most were polite. Some weren't. One retired cop opened the door just wide enough to say, "Let it go, kid. You're gonna get yourself in trouble asking questions like that." Then slammed it shut. Katie didn't know what that meant. But she knew fear when she saw it. By winter she was the only one still looking. She took time off school. Picked up a night shift to fund her own search. She bought a scanner. Started recording police chatter. She'd drive Lacy's old patrol routes, listening, watching, waiting. She visited the cabin again. This time with a camera. She circled the area. Found a rusted fire pit. Empty cans. Footprints too old to track. But every time she brought it to someone, the same response. "It's not enough." That phrase became a hammer. And slowly, the nails closed around Lacy's name. Case status, inactive. Last seen, May 2, 1989. Status, missing. Just another number in a drawer. Katie taped one of Lacy's old photos to her bathroom mirror. Black and white. Blurry. Her sister smiling in her trooper uniform. Underneath, Katie wrote in red ink, "She deserves better." The station had changed a lot since 1989. New paint. New chief. New recruits. The old desks were replaced. So were the radios. So were most of the people. But down a quiet hallway near the janitor's closet was a corkboard. No one really used it anymore. Dust lined the top. Thumbtacks rusted in place. And in the corner of that board, nearly hidden under a faded holiday shift schedule from 1997, was one photo. Trooper Lacy Monroe. Smiling. Young. Still in her academy uniform. No caption. No headline. Just the picture. Taped to the board by someone who hadn't worked there in over a decade. The hallway light above it flickered sometimes. No one fixed it. Most days people walked right past that board. Some didn't even know it was there. A rookie once asked an older sergeant who the woman was. The sergeant glanced up and said, "That's Monroe. She went missing. Long time ago." And that was it. No follow-up. No story. Just, missing. The board used to hold dozens of notices, open warrants, bolos, training memos. Now it held one face. Lacy. The last photo still hanging. Alone in the hallway. Forgotten by almost everyone. Except Katie. She knew it was still there. She checked every year. In 1992, Katie moved west. She needed a reset. A new town. A new job. Somewhere far from the woods that had taken her sister. She boxed up Lacy's letters. Her notes. The photo albums. And she kept them in a fireproof case in her closet. But every year on May 2nd she did the same thing. She picked up the phone. Dialed the old department. "Hi. I'm calling about a cold case. Lacy Monroe. My sister." Every year the person on the other end changed. And every year the answer stayed the same. "I'm sorry. There haven't been any new developments. Sometimes she asked to speak to a detective. Sometimes she asked if they still had the file. A few times they didn't know what she was talking about. Once someone even said, "That name doesn't ring a bell." Katie hung up that day and cried in her kitchen. But she never missed a call. Not 1 year. She sent letters to state offices, to journalists, even to a former FBI agent she found through a podcast. She tried everything. But by 1999, a full decade had passed. People forgot. Leads died. Names blurred. Only Katie remembered every detail. She'd stare at Lacy's picture. That same photo from the board. The same one that now sat on her desk inside a cracked glass frame. She'd whisper to it, "I didn't forget. I'll never forget." Then one summer night she got a call. It was a friend of a friend, someone working with the Forest Service. There was a fire near the old patrol routes. Burned half a hillside. Katie didn't think much of it. Until he said, "They found something in the ash." It started with a lightning strike. Late one summer night, a dry storm rolled over the mountains. No rain, just thunder and sparks. One bolt hit an old pine tree deep in the forest, not far from where Trooper Lacy Monroe vanished 10 years ago. Within minutes, flames spread fast. By morning, the fire had already covered several acres. Smoke poured into the sky. Helicopters flew overhead, dumping water. Fire crews from all over the state were called in. This wasn't just a brush fire. This was a full wildfire. It tore through the woods, burning trees, fences, and even parts of old hiking trails. The fire didn't care what stood in its way. Locals were told to stay back. Roads were blocked. Rangers cleared campsites. For 3 days, flames moved across the hillside. Some firefighters worked 16-hour shifts without rest. The heat was brutal. So was the smoke. By the 4th day, the fire had reached an old part of the forest, a place no one had used in years. A spot near mile marker 112. That's when the wind finally shifted. Rain came. And the flames slowed down. Once the area cooled, the crews began cleanup. No one expected what they'd find in the ash. After the fire was put out, crews walked through the damage. They cleared fallen trees, checked soil, and searched for any remaining sparks. That's when one firefighter noticed something strange. He was moving branches near a burned-out tree when he saw something underneath the dirt and ash, a corner of fabric. Melted. Blackened. But not gone. He called another team member over. They dug carefully and found what looked like a piece of a tent. But not just any tent, it was thick, heavy-duty. They kept digging. Soon the full thing came into view, a half-melted patrol tent. It was hidden deep under brush and twisted metal, like it had been buried years ago. Inside they found scraps of clothing, burnt, but still showing part of a police badge. They also found something worse. A scorched notebook. Most of the pages were stuck together. Others were gone. But you could still read a few words on the cover. Monroe. The fire team immediately called the sheriff's office. By the time deputies arrived, the sun was going down. One of them recognized the name instantly. It was the missing trooper from 1989. No one said a word for a while. They just stood there staring at the tent in the ash. The tent was old, the kind police used in the 1980s for long stakeouts or roadside emergencies. It was warped and blackened by the fire. But it still had one thing on it, a small patch with the state police emblem. The serial number matched the ones used in 1989. And that was the problem. This kind of tent had been retired over 30 years ago. No department used them anymore. And no one had reported one missing. The Forest Service didn't have records of any patrols or training near that area either. Not then, not now. So the question was simple. What was a police tent from the 1980s doing buried in the woods? And more importantly, why did it have Lacy Monroe's name inside? Investigators took photos. They sent the notebook to the lab. They searched around the area and found old tire tracks, half erased by the fire. They also found something buried under a pile of rocks near the tent, a melted flashlight with the initials LM scratched on the side. Whoever set up that tent had been there a long time ago. But it wasn't an accident. The tent had been hidden, not left behind. Covered in brush. Weighed down with metal parts. Meant to stay out of sight. Someone didn't want it to be found. And if it wasn't for the fire, it never would have been. They went back the next morning, crime scene techs, detectives, forest rangers. This time they weren't looking for fire damage. They were looking for answers. Inside the burned tent, under layers of ash and debris, they found what looked like small, white fragments. Bone. Not many. But enough. They brought in a forensic anthropologist. After careful excavation, the team confirmed what no one wanted to say out loud. Human remains. Charred. Fragile. Likely female. And based on their position, whoever it was had been lying down. Near the bones, tucked beneath a corner of melted canvas, they found something else. A badge. Melted. Blackened. But still whole. The number on it was just barely visible. A 5-digit ID burned into metal. The same number listed on every report from 1989. Lacy Monroe's badge. No one said a word. They just stood there, surrounded by soot and silence. 11 years of mystery. Now burned into the dirt in front of them. It didn't make sense at first. Lacy had disappeared during a routine patrol. There was no sign of a struggle. No clues. No witnesses. Now, after all this time, her body was found in a tent just 2 miles from the main road. 2 miles. Not hidden in a cave. Not dumped in a lake. Just buried under some brush, down a path no one had thought to check. All these years, search parties had passed nearby. Helicopters had flown over. Rangers had camped in the area. She was right there, the whole time. So how did they miss her? Theories started swirling. Some said she ran off. Others said she was killed and the scene staged. A few believed someone close to the department had known, and kept it quiet. But there was no way to know for sure. The notebook was too damaged. The bones too burnt. Time had erased too many details. But one truth was now undeniable. Lacy Monroe never left that forest. She died out there. Alone. In uniform. And for 11 years the answers were buried in a forgotten tent, waiting for a fire to set them free. The scene was quiet. Investigators had carefully placed the charred remains into bags. They were just about to leave when one firefighter stepped back inside the burned tent. He was doing a last check, making sure nothing had been missed. Then he felt it. Near the back corner of the tent, under where the bones had been, something stiff was caught between layers of melted tarp and dirt. He called over a detective. They used gloves and tweezers, slowly pulling it out. It was blackened, soaked, and stuck together, but it was something. A book. Small. Folded. Pages half melted from heat and water. At first it just looked like trash, ruined beyond saving. But when they opened it gently, a few words appeared. Handwriting. Someone had written inside. Dozens of entries. Lines. Notes. This wasn't a manual. Not a random notebook. This was personal. And whoever it belonged to had kept it hidden, tucked far under the tent's base, sealed away from weather and fire. For a moment no one said anything. Then the detective made a call. Get this to forensics. Now. Whatever was inside might finally explain what happened to Trooper Lacy Monroe. The notebook went straight to the state lab. Experts dried it out slowly, page by page. Some of the writing was gone, melted or washed away. But most of it had survived. It was a field log, not an official one, but something Lacy had made herself. Inside she wrote dates, times, patrol zones, odd things she saw, license plates that didn't match, people she didn't recognize. She had been tracking something. Each entry showed a pattern. She was watching a few local deputies, following them off-road, noting when their cars showed up in places they weren't supposed to be. One entry stood out. It talked about a late-night meeting in the woods. Lacy said she saw a man she didn't recognize giving a bag to a uniformed officer. She described a shed hidden behind mile marker 112. She said the deputy tried to block her car when he saw her watching. And then came the last page. The writing was shaky, rushed. If anything happens to me, it said, check the old storage site behind 112. That's where it all connects. It was dated one day before she vanished. That final sentence hit everyone hard. Lacy had known. She had felt the danger. And she left a trail in case she didn't make it out. For the first time in 11 years they had a real lead. Now it was time to follow it. At the state lab, experts began drying the notebook, one fragile page at a time. It was badly burned, edges melted, ink faded. But deep inside some pages had survived. When they opened the middle section they found handwriting. It was Lacy's. The notebook wasn't an official log. It wasn't part of her department-issued gear. This was something personal. She had written in it almost every day. There were dates, names, times, locations. She even drew little maps. At first it looked like notes from her patrols. But then it started to change. She wrote about strange things she saw. Patrol cars parked where they didn't belong. Officers leaving their zones at night. People going into the woods and not coming back for hours. Some names came up more than once. 2 deputies. Both worked her shift. Both had retired right after Lacy disappeared. The notebook had page after page of what looked like a private investigation. It was clear, Lacy wasn't just taking notes. She was watching someone. And she knew something wasn't right. This wasn't a random book. It was a record. And whoever took Lacy probably wanted it gone. The more investigators read, the darker it got. Lacy had been tracking people in her own department. She wrote down who was working each day, when they clocked in, when they left early. She followed them on back roads, marked when they met off duty. Even wrote down license plates she didn't recognize. It was detailed, organized. She wasn't guessing. She was building a case. In one entry, Lacy wrote about a deputy leaving the station with an unmarked box. She followed him to a cabin out near mile marker 112. He stayed there for 2 hours. No radio calls. No reason to be out there. Lacy didn't confront him. She just wrote everything down. In another entry, she mentioned hearing something strange over the police radio, a call that was quickly shut down by dispatch. It was clear Lacy was nervous. She underlined words. She circled dates. She even wrote "watch closely" in big letters at the top of some pages. This wasn't just a suspicion anymore. Something was going on inside her own department. And she was the only one keeping track of it. Until one day, the entry stopped. One page near the end stood out. The writing was rushed. A little shaky. Lacy wrote that she had parked near a gravel path off Route 9. She left her car and walked into the woods. She said she saw a deputy, one she had been tracking, standing near an old shed. She stayed hidden behind trees. Didn't move. Just watched. Then a second man arrived. Not in uniform. She didn't know who he was. The two men didn't speak. No handshakes. No names. Just a quiet exchange. The stranger handed the deputy a small bag. The deputy gave him something in return, a metal box. Then the stranger walked away. The deputy stayed for a few minutes, then drove off. Lacy said she took photos but didn't want to get closer. She ended the entry with a warning. "If anything happens to me," she wrote, "check the old storage site behind 112. That's where it starts." That was the last full entry in the notebook, dated just one day before she vanished. Whatever Lacy had seen, she knew it was dangerous. And now, 11 years later, the secret was finally out. Halfway through the notebook was a folded page, tucked tightly between entries, almost like Lacy had hidden it even from herself. When the lab unfolded it, what they saw wasn't just more notes. It was a list. Badge numbers, vehicle IDs, patrol schedules. All handwritten, all precise, with boxes checked next to each name. It wasn't guesswork. Lacy had been building something. The list detailed who was on duty each night, which patrol cars were in which zones, who swapped shifts at the last minute, who lied about their locations over the radio. It was the kind of list that could only come from someone inside the system, someone who knew how the patrol schedule worked, who could cross-check logs, who had access to dispatch notes. Lacy had even written down engine hours from specific vehicles, comparing where deputies said they'd been versus how far their cruisers had actually driven. And next to 3 names she wrote a single word: dirty. This wasn't paranoia. It was methodical. She was building a case, alone. At the bottom of the page she scribbled something quick, like an afterthought. "If they find this, I'm already gone." The notebook wasn't just her insurance. It was her warning. Some entries didn't mention officers at all. Instead, they talked about military-style trucks. No plates. No lights. Just flatbeds or enclosed trailers moving through the backwoods late at night. Lacy described watching one turn off Highway 3 onto an old Forest Service road. She followed it for 10 minutes before it disappeared into private land. She wrote about crates, wooden, heavy-looking, marked only with red tape or stencils. She never got close enough to see what was inside. But once she wrote, "could be drugs. But doesn't feel like drugs." In another entry she said a stranger came into her patrol zone, didn't talk, didn't give a name, wore a plain brown jacket and a headset, told her she didn't see anything and should go back to her route. That moment shook her. She didn't write his name. Just a description, and underlined one word 3 times. Fed. This was bigger than missing hours and dirty cops. It was organized, hidden, and protected. Lacy didn't know exactly what it was, but she knew she was circling something powerful. And she wasn't supposed to be looking. Her final entries are tense, clipped, as if she's always watching her back. The last sentence in the notebook reads, "Whatever this is, it goes high." The notebook's last page was different from the others. The handwriting was rushed, slanted, uneven. The ink looked like it was smudged by a shaking hand. But the words were clear enough to make everyone in the room stop breathing. If anything happens to me, check the old storage site behind mile marker 112. That's where it all connects. The date at the top? September 14, 1989. Just one day before Lacy Monroe vanished. The page had no extra notes. No arrows or circled names. It read like a goodbye, but also like a message. She had been planning something. A next step. Maybe even a confrontation. Investigators believe Lacy was close, too close, to exposing whatever was going on behind the scenes. Corruption, smuggling, maybe something darker. She had followed trails, connected dots, and narrowed it all down to a single place. An abandoned storage site off a back road most locals forgot even existed. But she never got the chance to return. The tent she was found in? It was less than a mile from that location. She might have been heading there the night she disappeared. Or maybe someone followed her from there. The notebook had stayed hidden for 11 years. Fire damaged. Buried beneath time and silence. But now, in the fluorescent light of the forensics room, that last page was undeniable. This wasn't just evidence. It was a message Lacy had fought to leave behind, her final warning in case she didn't make it out. And after 11 long years, someone finally heard her. Katie Monroe had always believed her sister didn't just vanish. Now, for the first time, someone called her with news. They asked her to come down to the station. In a small, windowless room, they handed her gloves and placed the fragile notebook on a felt-lined tray. A technician turned the pages with tweezers. And then, they showed her the final one. Katie's breath caught in her throat. She covered her mouth. Tears came fast, harder than she expected. The handwriting was unmistakable. Lacy had always looped her L's, dotted her I's with little dashes instead of dots. Katie didn't even need to read the words to know they were real. But she did anyway. If anything happens to me, that's where it all connects. Katie ran her fingers just above the paper, like she could feel her sister in the ink. Her hands shook. She sat there in silence for nearly 5 minutes. Then she whispered, she tried to tell someone, she left this for me. For over a decade, people had told Katie to move on, that there was nothing to find. But now, Lacy had spoken. And her voice was louder than ever. After reading the final page in Lacy's notebook, everything changed. The department didn't wait. They called in the state police, the FBI, and forensic experts. For 11 years, Lacy's file had been collecting dust. Now it was the top priority. Her note said one thing: check the old storage site behind mile marker 112. A team drove out to the road just past the forest where her remains were found. They stopped near the marker. Nothing stood out. No buildings. No driveways. Just trees. But they brought in a drone. From above, something showed up. A rectangle of cleared land about 300 feet off the road, completely hidden by thick brush and pine trees. It didn't match any map. That's where they went. They had to cut their way in. Vines, dead branches, and rotting trees blocked the path. But after nearly an hour of pushing through the overgrowth, one officer suddenly yelled, "I see metal." It was the corner of something man-made. Gray. Rusted. Flat against the earth. As they cleared more space, the full shape became clear. An old fence wrapped around a structure. No sign. No gate. No tracks. It looked like no one had been there in years. But Lacy knew about it. Her note led them right to it. They radioed in. "We've located a concealed structure behind 112. Request backup." Everyone knew this might be it, the thing Lacy was chasing. She hadn't just guessed. She had been here. Now the question was, what was inside? The fence was 6 feet high, covered in rust and buried under years of dead leaves. It took bolt cutters to get through. Inside was a clearing. Just dirt and weeds. But in the center stood a metal shed, long, narrow, and almost fully camouflaged by the forest. It looked like an old shipping container. No windows. One door. Padlocked shut. The air smelled weird. Like old chemicals or burned plastic. One officer stepped forward and tried the lock. Rusted shut. Another officer cut it clean with a power saw. The door groaned as it opened. Everyone backed up. Inside it was dark. No lights, no electricity. Just shadows and dust floating in the beam of a flashlight. But the shape of what was inside stopped them cold. Crates, shelves, plastic tubs, and something even worse. Gas masks, protective suits, and a row of old police uniforms, still on hangers like someone had been collecting them. One of the crates was cracked open. Inside were chemical jugs. Meth-making supplies. This wasn't just storage. This was a hidden drug lab, buried in the woods behind a fake fence never meant to be found. Lacy had discovered it. That's why she died. The team suited up in hazmat gear. The shed's air was thick with toxic fumes. It had been sealed so long the chemicals were breaking down, leaking into the floor and walls. Inside, every shelf was full. Plastic tubs held powders and liquids. Some were labeled, others not. It wasn't just meth ingredients. There were boxes of pills, baggies, and syringes. A full drug operation, set up like a mobile lab. In the back they found a steel cabinet. Inside, stacks of papers, receipts, maps, even handwritten notes, similar to Lacy's writing but not hers. Some of them had police radio codes. Others listed drop points and patrol times. It was like someone had been tracking who was on duty and using that to move drugs safely. One drawer held a duffel bag. Inside were badges. 6 of them. All real. All from the same county. But some belonged to officers who had retired. One belonged to a deputy who died years ago. These were spares, probably stolen. Used to impersonate real officers during smuggling runs. It was exactly what Lacy had described. Crates, chemicals, uniforms, proof of corruption, of a cover-up. And it had been sitting there rotting for over a decade. All because no one listened. Inside the shed, investigators found a pair of gloves and a wool hat, both sealed in a tub under plastic tools. They were old, moldy but still usable for DNA testing. Weeks later results came back. 2 names. Both were former deputies from the same department Lacy worked in. Both had retired suddenly in the spring of 1990, just months after Lacy disappeared. Deputy Carl Rains and Deputy Mitch Holloway. At the time their retirement seemed normal. One said he had health issues. The other moved out of state. But now, their DNA was inside a hidden drug lab. Investigators pulled their old records. They had both worked night patrol in the same district where Lacy vanished. Sometimes they even worked the same shift as her. And both had access to areas Lacy was assigned to. The department quietly reopened their personnel files. Then quietly contacted each man. Carl Rains was still living in-state, retired on a ranch. Mitch Holloway was in Arizona running a trucking business. The FBI visited them separately. Both said the same thing. We don't know anything about a shed. But they were lying. Their names weren't in any logbooks. But the DNA didn't lie. It put them at the scene, inside a sealed drug lab, years after they claimed they had retired for good. Lacy had written that she believed someone in uniform was involved. She didn't name names in the notebook. But this confirmed it. She was right. 2 former cops, both once trusted, were now the main suspects in her disappearance. And the only reason they were caught was because someone finally read her notebook. At first, both men denied everything. But after weeks of pressure, one of them cracked. It was Carl Rains. Agents said he looked tired. His hands shook. He asked for water. Then he said, "She had a camera." They leaned in. Rains explained Lacy had been snooping around the forest for weeks. She had told people she was investigating a meth dump site, but no one believed her. Until one night she found it. She didn't go inside the shed. But she took photos from the tree line. She left tire marks. She left footprints. And somehow Rains found out. She may have told someone. Or maybe he saw her himself. Either way, he says he followed her that night, in an unmarked cruiser. He claims he only wanted to scare her off. But she recognized him. She yelled. She reached for her radio. And that's when it happened. He says Mitch showed up too. He doesn't explain how. But both of them knew she was about to blow the whole thing wide open. So they stopped her. He didn't say how. He just said, "We took care of it. Then we burned the place." He said it like it meant nothing. But it meant everything. That was the night Lacy Monroe vanished. Carl Rains gave his version. He said Lacy got too close. That she was reckless. That he and Mitch only meant to scare her straight. Convince her to drop it. He claimed they waited near the shed. When she showed up, she saw them and ran. She tripped, he said. Hit her head on a rock. He swore it wasn't murder. Just panic. Just bad luck. But investigators didn't buy it. The location where her body was found, inside a burned tent far from the shed, didn't match his story. Her bones showed blunt force trauma, not just a fall. And why did they burn everything? Why torch the patrol tent? Why bury a badge? Too many lies. Too many gaps. Even if it had started as an accident, they made it a crime, by hiding her, by burning her tent, by letting her family suffer for 11 years. Rains tried to make it sound like a mistake. But the facts told another story. Lacy's notebook, the one Katie had read 100 times, told the real story. Every page was filled with careful notes. Dates, license plates, patterns. She had mapped out drop locations. She had written in bold letters, "I think it's someone in uniform." There was fear in her writing, but also purpose. She wasn't chasing rumors. She had a plan. She was going to expose them. Her last few entries described the shed. She had found it days before she vanished. And she wasn't planning to run. She was planning to report it. She just wanted enough proof. She never got the chance. The notebook made one thing clear. This wasn't an accident. Lacy didn't fall. She was stopped. Two men took everything from her, her life, her future, and her chance to do what she was trained to do, protect people. But in the end she still did. Because her notebook, her words, cracked the case wide open. Lacy Monroe had solved her own murder. In early spring, the sheriff's department finally moved. Both Carl Raines and Mitch Holloway were arrested. The charges: manslaughter, obstruction, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. They were held in separate counties. The news hit local headlines fast. People couldn't believe it. Two ex-cops, both once praised for their service, were now behind bars for what they did to Lacy Monroe. But just 5 days before the trial was set to begin, something happened. Mitch Holloway was found dead in his jail cell. He had used a bedsheet. No note. No goodbye. Nothing. The guard said he seemed quiet all week, not angry, just numb. His lawyers said he knew the evidence was strong, that the notebook alone was enough to bury him. And now it was over. Mitch would never stand trial. Never take the stand. Never explain why. He had escaped justice again, this time for good. Katie was crushed. The man who helped take her sister was gone just like that. No apology. No truth. No closure. But the trial would go on, because Carl Raines was still alive. And now all eyes were on him. Carl Raines sat through the trial, quiet the entire time. He showed no emotion, even when photos of Lacy's burned tent were shown. Even when her notebook was read out loud in court. Witnesses testified. DNA experts explained the evidence. The jury listened. And when it was time to decide, they didn't take long. Guilty. Carl Raines was found guilty of manslaughter, conspiracy, and covering up a crime. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison, the maximum allowed for his age. But even after the verdict, Carl still wouldn't talk. He didn't cry. Didn't explain. Didn't say why. He said only one thing as they led him away. It wasn't supposed to go that far. That was it. No details. No real truth. No full confession. But Katie didn't need more. She had the notebook. She had the evidence. She had the fire that brought it all back. Even without Carl's words, the story was clear. Two men ran a meth operation in secret. Lacy found it. They stopped her. And then they tried to erase her. But they failed. Because now the world knew. Katie sat in the front row, hands shaking, eyes locked on the judge. She had waited 11 years for this moment. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Guilty. She didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes. For the first time in over a decade, she breathed. It wasn't everything. There was still pain. Still loss. Still 100 questions she'd never get answers to. But it was something. It was a courtroom saying, Lacy was right. Lacy mattered. When Carl was taken out in cuffs, Katie didn't look away. She wanted him to see her face. To know she never stopped fighting. To know that her sister's voice, though silenced, had never disappeared. The trial was over. And now the healing could begin. They held the funeral on a cold morning in November. Lacy's casket was small. Only partial remains were found, but it was draped with an American flag. Police officers from across the state came to pay their respects. The department gave her full honors. A 21-gun salute. A folded flag handed to Katie. Her melted badge sat in a small glass case near the headstone. Katie stood in front of the crowd and spoke. Her voice shook, but she didn't cry. She never stopped being a trooper, Katie said. Even when no one believed her, even when no one looked, she kept fighting. People nodded. Some wiped away tears. A bagpiper played as the casket was lowered into the ground. It was the goodbye they never got to have. For 11 years Lacy had been missing. Now she had come home. Her name was carved into stone. Her story had been told. And finally she was laid to rest. Not as a missing person. Not as a cold case number. But as Trooper Lacy Monroe. The forest where Lacy was found is still there. It's quiet again. The trees have grown back. The grass has returned. But one small area remains scorched, the place where the tent once stood. No one touches it. The state put up a small fence and a warning sign. It's not for safety. It's for memory. People sometimes leave flowers there. Or photos. Or notes. The ground is black and cracked even after all this time. But around it life has returned. Birds sing. Animals roam. The forest is healing, slowly but surely. It still holds secrets. But now it also holds truth. And in that burned clearing, surrounded by new growth, one thing is clear. Lacy Monroe was never forgotten. On Main Street in the old firehouse building, there's a small room with a single glass display. It's called the Lacy Monroe exhibit. Inside is her melted badge. The corner of her notebook still legible. And a piece of the tent, charred, folded, but real. People come in quietly. Some stay a few minutes. Others stay longer. One wall holds photos. Lacy in uniform, Lacy at the academy, Lacy with Katie. There's a note under the display that reads, "She asked the right questions. She didn't back down. And she paid the price." Local kids take field trips there now. They learn not just about crime, but about courage. Every year, on the anniversary of the fire, someone leaves a single white rose at the front door. No one knows who. The museum doesn't advertise. It's small, quiet, personal. But it keeps her memory alive. In a town that once forgot, Lacy's name is now spoken with respect. She's not just a missing person. She's a symbol of what happens when someone refuses to stay silent. It took 11 years. A missing trooper. A fire no one could explain. And a notebook buried in the woods. But in the end, Lacy told her story. She wrote everything down. Names, dates, places. She left behind proof. And because of that, the truth came out. Katie reads her sister's notebook sometimes. She knows it by heart now. She keeps it in a locked drawer. Not because she's hiding it, but because it's sacred. It's what finally brought her sister home. People still ask Katie how she kept going. How she never gave up. Her answer is always the same: Lacy wouldn't have given up on me. Now Katie walks through life with both grief and peace. She lost her sister. But she got her truth. And in the quiet moments, when she drives past the forest or visits the small museum, or sees someone stop to read the plaque, she smiles. Because Lacy Monroe isn't just gone. She's remembered. She's honored. She's finally home. The truth didn't bring her back to life. But it made sure she didn't disappear forever. And for Katie, that's enough. That's justice. That's closure. That's her sister's story, finally told.